Welcome to the next episode of Brandland. I'm your host, Garrett Justice, and I also have my co-host here, David Asvig. David, how's it going today?
Very good. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. And we're excited to welcome our guest today, Michael Keplinger, who's the Director of Strategy and a Managing Partner at SmashBrand. Michael, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me on the call. Looking forward to it.
I'm super excited to dive into our topic today. I think this is going to be really interesting topic to just kind of pick your brain on. Before we do, though, why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit more about your background and what SmashBrand does?
Sure. So I'm as the director of strategy and a partner, really, my partner Kevin and I really have more of the data side, the strategy side versus the design side. And I think what's unique about our background is unlike a lot of agency owners coming from art school, we've owned several consumer brands ourselves. And so, and really in that process, I think our favorite part was that idea part of coming up with what's going to work, bringing it to market. And so we still own some of our own brands, but primarily we do that for our clients here of helping them kind of put these ideas in a place to make them very effective in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think what's really interesting too is, you having that unique perspective as being an agency owner right now who, a lot of times agency owners, they are those that typically come from the creative background, like you said, but, your background really is in engineering, right? So tell us a little bit more about what that transition was like to be someone who has a background in studying engineering to go to being a managing partner for an agency.
Yeah, it's it's a weird path to get here. Kevin and I met almost 25 years ago, very early career in a very technical role. But I always wanted to go back to school, a business school, and thinking I'd really stay more of an operational and finance type way, the way my brain worked around the engineering side of things. But just really fell into consumer psychology and consumer behavior, and then of course coming back and applying that after business school to our own brands. It became kind of an obvious natural fit to bring that into the process as we started to do this design work for consumer, because we are fairly niche in consumer packaged goods. And so that's the business that we've been in, the type of products, things on the shelf, physical shelves, although that shelf is quite virtual these days in Amazon. But really it really was a natural fit to go in there and really just try and apply that data and the strategy to a process that brings winners to the market.
Yeah. And I think that's an excellent segue into our topic today, because I think that, that combination of your background, bringing that to this creative world is probably part of what fuels and differentiates SmashBrand. Like you said, your agency is really a strategy creative agency focused in that consumer packaged goods, segment of the market. And I think what, as I've looked into it, what seems to make SmashBrand really unique is your focus on being able to A/B test product packaging, right? So I think what's really interesting about that, and that's what I want to dive into a little bit more today, is how do you go about doing that? I think often as marketers, we think of A/B testing as something that you do across digital channels, right? Like many of us are A/B testing, copy on our websites or things like that. But when it gets into those in-person or physical channels like product packaging, how can you do that? And I guess the first question I have, before we jump into the meat of that, is why do you think it's important for marketers to be able to A/B test some of those in-person or physical channels, such as product packaging across consumer touchpoints?
Yeah, I think that answer has a number of really factors that I think influence that. But I think the why is because for the same reasons that we do it in digital, you want an effective product, right? And so, but understanding what effective means is really best done measuring. And in a digital world where you can change the homepage of a website or a landing page of some copy and pay for ads and send a whole bunch of people there and actually have those metrics that are built into the very nature of how digital world works, it's natural that we've really evolved you just won't do that. You shouldn't do that without moving forward there. They've got, SaaS platforms that make it so easy to just kind of do it for you. But historically, it wasn't done. It was that, hey, something's not working. Let's try something else. And that process had a pretty long a long go at it, right? You try something for a few months, maybe a few years, and then you try something else. But what you're missing in that is maybe the market changed. There's different competitors, the trends have changed. And so it was never really a perfect science. And getting to today, why you still don't see it today is because what we're talking about is a physical product. We're talking about something that more or less, as far as all the pieces of your marketing, when you have a physical product, this is a fairly static piece of it. It's the only marketing medium communication that every single customer sees. You can count on that. They didn't buy the product if they don't get that packaging. And yet so much guesswork goes into doing it. And then, I think that some brands that don't do it well, they end up paying the price because they overspend for all the other activation side of it. And so that's why I think it's important, because getting that message right at the same time when it's not easy to change can really multiply your efforts down the road and either save money or at the better side of it, just kind of have more traction and more sales and velocity of that.
Yeah, I love that. For our listeners out there who don't know a little bit about my background, like you and I were talking about, Michael, years ago, I worked at Target at their corporate headquarters, actually in packaging for a few years. And they used to say, product packaging on shelf is the last 10 seconds of marketing, right? Like you said, it's that thing that everyone's going to interact with, but it's that thing that really helps people push them to buy in the sea of other products that they might see on shelf, whether physically or digitally, right? It can help with that. So
yeah, if you fast forward to those kind of that viewpoint that Target had many, many years ago, I would almost argue today, and depending on the product category, it's the first and the last 10 seconds, because our brains are so turned off to advertising. We can look at our Facebook feed and just it filters them out. It doesn't even see them. And there's tests that prove this really. And so that engagement is so different. And if you have a low price point impulse buy product, which is typically what you find commonly in, say grocery or drugstore, you're even more up against that the packaging is the first in many times and the only piece of marketing communication that you have with that customer.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Awesome.
So can you give us, as we kind of dive into testing, A/B testing, give us kind of an example of like, what does that look like to A/B test a product like that?
Sure. And, as I said, too, and certainly we're not unique in an agency, a strategic agency, to really work a lot on what you're testing. And that's the strategy piece, right? That research up front. Some clients really understand that and they can articulate who their customer is, what their value is, what makes them unique. And we can kind of help move that into the manifesting that through the design of what that looks like. But fast forwarding to the testing side of it, I call that more of our research and strategy side. But at some point now you have a plan, you have a strategy that you're going to design around. And the design is a combination of obviously visuals and messaging and hierarchy, emphasis, all these things. So these pieces you bring forward into concepts that are so common and people, and so here where a lot of brands, I think, are going to say they're all going to vote on what they like the best and what looks the best. And if they're a small company, it's going to be whatever the CEO likes. But here is where we have a number of tests that we'll bring into the process. And so a typical place right here is something that we call a concept test. So we have, let's say we're looking at 3 to 5 different concepts. And at this stage, what we do is you have to map and test and quantitatively measure the performance of those different designs against your drivers. And so you've got category drivers and brand drivers. These are the things like, what are the reasons that are really behind consumers and what's in their head of why they make purchase decisions? We have choices and substitutes. So anyways, that's the very strategic part of and the framework of trying to decide what's important to test and what matters and what moves that needle. And so then we actually kind of go in and let's say we take an audience of 600 targeted consumers and split them up and show them, whether it's 3 or 5, they all see just that one. And then on a comparative basis, we can measure the performance on these different attributes for the goals of the product, whether it's, initially and packaging has a lot of jobs to do. It has to capture attention. It has to communicate what the product is. And then it has to really ultimately sell the product. And so across there, we measure these things. And so typically what will come out of that is something's working really well on design A and something else is working really well on design C. And, through our experience, we can say, look, this is how I think we're going to make a recommendation to move forward in our design process to better align with the brand, better align with, the core positioning of whether it's a brand or more product attributes and these kinds of things, and move towards something that is much closer to a design that we think is shelf ready. And then from there, move to a whole completely different type of test that we have. We're really kind of put the proof there. And maybe this is more aligned with what we're seeing with A/B testing in the digital world, and put it up and simulate that buying experience in front of, a key set of competitors that are competing products. And really nothing changes. You've got the same, say, two competitors, and then you're alternating a couple designs or messaging variations, and you're measuring that performance across those drivers that matter, but also, and most ultimately, purchase intent.
That's fascinating. So is that done like in this like mock environment, or are you actually producing packaging and it's live in certain stores and you're measuring the differences between different product packaging there?
Yeah, so I would say that probably would be the best way to do it. But barring $1 million budget, we tend to simulate it the best we can in an online environment, and so we primarily will focus depending on the product, and there's a number of ways. And so I think of it more as a framework than a process, because we have to really think about how do we best match the buying experience? And there's so many factors at play there. How many competitors are there? Maybe you're inventing a new product category, and really you don't have direct competitors. You have substitutes, though. They solve a close enough job. And then, is it online? Is it in the store? And all these things that the packaging must do. And can we focus on, the primary display panel, that front of the shelf thing, is really that first piece, and then maybe we'll drive into there. But that's how we simulate it. So we kind of think through all those factors. How can we best represent that? Sometimes we'll show images of the product, or sometimes it's a bit more complex, and so we'll actually build a video and help to explain that, particularly on the concept side, because what you're doing is, at the end of the day, the job of that packaging is to communicate everything about that brand, everything about its positioning all by itself. And so when we do our competitive test, it tends to be just that. We're validating that the packaging is doing its job. But on a concept test, we might actually create that context. Like, let me show you this is where I want to land. Now you tell me which of these packaging is actually doing the better job of landing there on a various set of attributes. And so they're very different types of testing, and we have a few other nuanced differences that we'll do there depending on the client. But I think that's the bulk of kind of wrapping your head around how you get in there and test there. And if you put enough people through that, I think, in some ways, I think it's as good, if not better data than going out into the stores and talking to, which happens a lot with focus groups and shopper intercepts, and you're talking to 10 to 15 people. It's really easy to get a bit biased and really not really get really good solid data.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, the question I was thinking as you were first talking about this is, how do you do this logistically? I just know from my past experience that, packaging is one of those things, especially at these larger companies, that can be, you could be working on it a year out, and it takes weeks to, ship it and have it in store and land at a certain time and place. And right. And so I love the idea of being able to leverage, digital mediums and that environment to be able to pressure test this, before launching. And so you have that feedback before it's out there live, and you don't have to just guess and hope you got it right the very first time.
Yeah, we've built a lot of tools around that. I think they're primarily designed to keep the complexity on the SmashBrand side, but really, when you think about the output, it's very straightforward to understand and see, and it's actionable decision making. And so the way we've kind of built it over the years is to really, there's a lot of moving pieces, right? You've got different people seeing different things, and then how do you bring those together and weigh them and measure them in an easy way? That's really kind of how we've built that and tried to streamline this as much as you can, because it is very, it's thought work to really building the test in the proper way.
Do you have, I'd love for our audience to really kind of visualize like what this would look like. Do you have like a real life example with one of your clients where you can kind of walk us through what that looked like? What were some of the learnings along the way, and so forth?
So let me think of a good example. I think a project we worked on a couple of years ago is a good example because it really, I think it touched on all these pieces. And so this brand, the product is called Sweet Scoop. They make kitty litter. And the reason I think that that's a good example to walk through is because they're already in the market. They were growing, but slowly and struggling. And their product was different. It was kitty litter, which is like, okay, it's just, aren't they all the same? But they made their kitty litter out of wheat. And there was a reason for it. And those reasons were very different, and consumers, weighed on those differently. It was, it's more sustainable. It's not all the kind of chemicals that are in regular kitty litter. But then on top of that, also something happened with the wheat, that there was like a biological thing that would happen that really cut down on the smell. And so they came to us because people didn't get it. Like it couldn't explain all these different pieces and kind of create that hierarchy. And so they knew why it worked. They knew why their core kind of tribe audience was really caring about it and very passionate about why this is the best kitty litter ever. But the mainstream people that are probably just passing it on the shelf at PetSmart were just kind of passing it over, and because they couldn't get it in the packaging. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about. They had never seen an advertisement before. The first time they stumble across this product is right here on the packaging. And so this is, very, very important to get that right. And so that work really, working with them to really understand that key points and the strategy and really what people cared about. We kind of came up with some concept ideas to bring that forward. And in this concept testing we did here was a bit more of a hybrid, because we were weighing different messaging and really creating more of a stream. So they had a lot to communicate, and their old packaging, I would call it cluttered. And so it just kind of created this cognitive dissonance, which basically means I'm too confused to care right now. So I think that they created some resistance, some purchase resistance there. And everything I'm saying, I mean, even whether you're physical products or digital, these things apply on a website page, on a landing page, on a piece of print marketing copy, because they're all the same consumers. It's just the medium that we work with here. And so in that initial concept testing, we were measuring the importance on different kind of audience segments on, which of these value propositions mattered. And what we learned from that was that, yes, that we were validating that their packaging, and we're always baselining. So their existing packaging on a client that has something on the shelf is always in the test. Why would you go forward if you're not improving what you're doing? And it particularly finding people who had never seen the product before. And so you have a fresh set of eyes and comparing how they think. And it's like, okay, so now I've basically quantified what consumers think about your packaging today, that as they go through and they see it on the shelf. Now I've shown you where they're confused. It's a little too cluttered. They don't kind of get this. And now we've shown you several different options of how we're solving those problems. And we're also measuring how they rank the importance of these different things, which allows us then in design to create more emphasis, more placement of where you lead into the story of the product, communicating what it is, communicating why it's different, and why should I care that it's made out of wheat? Who cares? Well, actually, you should care. And so these are the things that we can learn pretty well through this concept test. And then move into, and then we took that and we basically had a whole nother round of design and came back and said, okay, we've solved all these problems. This is what we learned in our concept test. This is how we've solved, through design, through messaging and visual placement and color and everything that design is of basically optimizing this packaging to what's working for consumers. And we've got 3 designs that are, a lot more similar than we were doing in our concept test, but let's put them to the test. And so we put it up against the top 2 kitty litters that you're also likely to find in Target and PetSmart. And we test it and we measure. And our most important metric here is purchase intent, which when, you find the target audience, they own cats, they need kitty litter, they're at the store, they see these 3 products. Which one do you choose? And then we drill into why and the drivers that are behind that. And so I'm not going to tell them that they can go into the store and they're going to sell X, but I can tell them if you put this new design instead of your old design, then you should see an improvement by 23% or some number such as that. And so that is kind of the basis for what we do. And they get a lot of confidence. And so I think that the testing that we bring and really the quantity and the level of testing that we do, what I think our clients are the value they're getting is a reduction of risk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. It's a fascinating example to hear that, and hearing, the return on that, like the ability to increase, that purchase intent by 23%. I mean, I know on your site, looking at some stuff, it looks like, some of your clients are up to 40% or more on that return. And so that's fascinating. I can definitely see the value in being able to go more confidently that first time to market, reducing that risk.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you really have to, it's sometimes they'll like, hey, I carved out a budget to do some packaging redesign, and it's a small piece of the overall marketing budget. And I think that the thing that is so important to think about is that it's an amplifier. And so yes, you spend a little bit more and you do this right. And you test it, and because it's not cheap to go talk to consumers 4 times in a project, and they're all targeted consumers, and really build that all in there. But it can have significant increase in sales and decrease in that kind of the cost per acquisition on that kind of that activation side of things.
Yeah, I love that. So I guess my question then is, I know that there are some of our listeners out there who this is very applicable for, who probably come from, that consumer packaged goods industry, or they sell a physical product, they're thinking about packaging. But for our listeners out there who don't, right, who have mostly digital products, or maybe it's software or services or whatever, what are the takeaways? How would you summarize the takeaways and the learnings of how they can apply some of the principles we talked about today to use consumers to validate and test some of their ideas when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, I think that there's a way to apply a lot of it, and because with a physical product, for all the reasons I already talked about, you kind of don't get another shot. Once it's on the shelf, it's fairly static, and so it necessitates the need to do all that upfront work and get it right. But for that exact reason, and digital being the opposite of that, I think there's a tendency to be, for a lack of a better word, a little bit less cautious. I don't want to use the word lazy, but It's just so easy to say, I'll go change it later. But you could have 3 things you're A/B testing, but what if they're all just off mark? All you're going to know is what's the best of mediocre. And so I think the analogy in your question really is just as we do, that strategy that we have to do to get it right on the package, even before we go into testing in our process, is really going to pay off, whether you're digital or physical product, and really understanding that customer, what's those drivers, the getting down to the real reasons that tend to not be as close to the product or service that we think they are, and those, like, what's going inside their head. I think that is no matter what business you are in, if you're selling a product or a service, whether it's digital or physical, just that strategy, that work that you do to really understand the needs of the customer are going to pay off in spades. And then as you move forward, and I think it's a bit easier to do what we're doing in the digital world, because but even still, a lot of people will pay to drive that traffic. And so, if you're paying to drive traffic and you do a better job up front, you can even save on that, or even lost time in market for not really having it right for what you're going to learn, accelerate that learning.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Michael, this has been an excellent conversation. I think it's fascinating, your approach, and obviously it's been super successful for your clients. So appreciate you taking the time to just kind of share your process and some real live examples for us. I think there's so much that, all marketers can apply from what we talked about today in their own businesses. So if there are listeners out there who want to learn more about SmashBrand, or who have follow-up questions for you, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Yes, I would say probably the 2 best ways. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me at LinkedIn, Michael Keplinger, search SmashBrand, pretty easy to find. But also just learning more about both our process and some of these kind of case studies of how we have applied this to other businesses at smashbrand.com.
Awesome. Well, Michael, it's been such a great conversation today. Appreciate you taking the time. And I hope that up there in Boise, you're able to get out and hit some mountain biking trails here soon as spring's upon us.
It's coming quick.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you both.